Welcome back to Feminism, Theory and Practice. I am Rahul Kundu. This is lecture 10. Over 9 lectures, we have built a comprehensive toolkit for understanding gender, power, and resistance. Think about where we started. Lecture 1: What is feminism? A simple question with a complicated answers. We traced the evolution from first wave suffrage to second wave liberation to third wave intersectionality to fourth wave digital activism. We explored liberal feminism's focus on equal rights, radical feminism's analysis of patriarchy as a system, socialist feminism's connection of gender to class, post-colonial feminism challenge to Western universalism, queer theories deconstruction of the categories themselves. And throughout, we kept returning to India because feminism looks different when filtered through caste, colonial history, and specific textures of South Asian experience. That's a lot of ground. And today, in final lecture, we are asking three questions. Where has feminism succeeded? What challenges remain? And what new directions are emerging that will shape feminist thought in the coming decades? Let's start with victories because it's easy to focus on what's wrong and forget what's been won. Women now comprise over 50% of law firm associates in the United States. In 1980s, the number was 8%. Think about the shift. Global maternity mortality rate has decreased 34% since 2000. More mothers are surviving childbirth because people organized, advocated, and demanded better. Girls completing lower secondary school rose from 69% to 77% between 2012 and 2020. In 83 countries, women now have better legal protections than a generation ago. These aren't abstract statistics. These are real victories achieved through decades of organizing, advocacy, and resistance. People fought for this. People are still fighting. But let's be honest about what remains. The World Economic Forum estimates it will take 134 years to close the gender gap at current rates. 134 years. One in three married Indian women still experiences physical abuse. Two-thirds of rapes in India go unpunished. Globally, 158 million women and girls will still live in extreme poverty by 2030. And we face new challenges that feminists a generation ago couldn't have anticipated. A well funded anti gender movement now frames feminism as a threat to traditional values. They have organized, they are funded, they are effective. Digital harassments target women who speak publicly. The internet promised connection, it also delivered coordinated abuse. Reproductive rights are rolling back. The Dobbs decision in the United States, restrictions tightening globally. Ground we thought was secure, isn't it? And in Afghanistan, women have been comprehensively excluded from public life. A generation of progress erased. So today, we explore four frontiers that are reshaping feminist thought: ecofeminism, disability justice, AI and gender, and transnational feminism. These aren't separate from what we have learned. They built on intersectionality. They extend the personal in political. They ask whose voices get heard in new context with new stakes. Let's begin with connection between exploitation of nature and exploitation of women. Ecofeminism rests on a provocative thesis. The same logic that justifies dominating nature justifies dominating women. Think about that for a moment. The conceptual framework that treats that earth as inert raw material for extraction. These are the same frameworks that treat women's bodies and labor as resources to be exploited. The Australian philosopher Val Plumwood developed this analysis in her book Feminism and the Mastery of Nature. She argued that Western philosophy relies on interlocking dualisms: reason versus emotion, culture versus nature, mind versus body, male versus female. And in each pair, the first term is valued over second. These aren't just abstract philosophy, they are tools of domination. The American philosopher Karen Warren identified what she called the logic of domination, a conceptual framework featuring hierarchical thinking, oppositional dualisms, and justification for subordination based on perceived superiority. If women are associated with nature and nature is inferior to culture, then women's subordination follows logically. Do you see how the pieces fit? No one has articulated this connection more powerfully than Vandana Shiva, India's most prominent ecofeminist voice. In her words, capitalist patriarchy says nature is dead and women are stupid. Ecofeminism is saying that nature is very much alive and women are super smart. Shiva's foundational text, Staying Alive: Women, Ecology and Survival in India, published in 1988, emerged directly from her involvement with the Chipko movement. You may have heard of Chipko, Himalayan women protecting forests by embracing trees, literally hugging them to prevent logging. But here's what Shiva emphasized: these women's actions are and were not based on emotion or tradition, but on their material understanding of ecological and economic interconnections. Think about what that means. Rural women in Uttarakhand understood something that development economists missed. Forests aren't just timber to be harvested. They are living systems that provide water, prevent erosion, supply fuel and fodder. Their knowledge wasn't romantic or primitive, it was ecological science. Shiva's work has three major dimensions. First, her concept of biopiracy, the corporate appropriation of indigenous knowledge. She successfully challenged patent on neem, basmati rice, and wheat varieties. Companies were trying to claim ownership of knowledge that Indian farmers had developed over centuries. Second, her Navdanya movement, Nine Seeds, has established over 150 community seed banks across India, training 55 lakh farmers in organic agriculture, seed sovereignty against corporate control. Third, her analysis of death of nature assumption, connecting extractive capitalism to both ecological and gendered violence. Indian environment movements often distinctive models. The Narmada Bachao Andolan, led by Medha Patkar since 1985, employed satyagraha tactics, Jal Samarpan, hunger strikes, road blockades to fight displacement of over 320,000 people by Sardar Sarovar Dam. These movements, as scholar note, are fundamentally different from those in the West because they are triggered by the local poor struggle for survival rather than abstract environmentalism. When a Dalit woman in Gujarat resists displacement by a dam, she is not fighting the environment in some abstract sense. She is fighting for her home, her livelihood, her community survival. Vandana Shiva also said the marginalization of women and the destruction of biodiversity go hand in hand. This insight that ecological justice and gender justice are inseparable will only become more urgent as climate change accelerates. Women constitute 80% of climate refugees. They travel farther for water and fuel. They depend on climate sensitive agriculture. They die at higher rates in natural disasters. Ecofeminism isn't luxury, it's necessity. Disability justice represent one of the most significant expansions of intersectional feminist theory. Now, you have probably heard of disability rights, legal protections, accommodations, accessibility requirements, important work. But disability justice goes further. It addresses interlocking systems of oppression. It asks whose bodies are valued, whose are disposable, and who gets to decide. The Since Invalid Collective, founded in 2005 in San Francisco, articulated 10 principles of disability justice that have become foundational to the movement. And listen to this: ableism, coupled with white supremacy, supported by capitalism, underscored by heteropatriarchy, has rendered the vast majority of the world invalid. That's intersectionality in action. Not disability as a single issue, but disability interlocking with race, class, gender, sexuality. Let me introduce you to three concepts that have transformed how we think about disability. First, the normate. Rosemary Garland Thomason coined the term to name the composite identity position held by those unmarked by stigmatized identifiers. The imagined everyman whose self determination and physical sturdiness makes American democracy philosophical possible. The normate is unmasked, unexamined, assumed. Everyone else is measured against this standard and found lacking. Second, crib time. Alison Kaffer describes crib time as flex time not just expanded but exploded. It requires reimagining our notions of what can and should happen in time. Rather than bend disabled bodies and mind to meet the clock, crib time bends the cloak to meet disabled bodies and mind. This isn't just about accommodations. It's about questioning why productivity is measured the way it is. Who benefits from that measurement? Third, compulsory able bodiness. Remember Adriana Rich, Compulsory Heterosexuality from Lecture 8? Robert McQueer argues we must reorganize a parallel system of compulsory able bodiedness that produces disability as a deviance. Cripping, he argues, insists that the system of compulsory able bodiedness should not be the norm. In India, disability intersects with caste in ways that demand attention. Research from the Center for Law and Policy Research in Bangalore reveals clear relationships. Dalit persons with disability have lower workforce participation, reduced access to entitlements, and lower education rates than the upper caste counterparts. The Rights of Person with Disability Act 2016 doesn't adequately address these intersections. The UN Committee on Right of Person with Disabilities noted absence of measures to combat multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination in its observation to India. Disability justice calls us to imagine different futures, not where disabled people are fixed or cured, but where society itself is transformed. We live increasingly in systems sharpened by artificial intelligence. Search engines curate what we see. Hiring algorithms filter who gets interviewed. Facial recognition identifiers or misidentifies who we are. Credit score determines who gets loan. These systems are not neutral. They encode existing inequalities. Safia Omozo Noble, a MacArthur Fellow and UCLA professor, coined the term algorithmic oppression in her influential book Algorithms of Oppression. Her research began in 2009 with a simple search. She typed black girls into Google. The results? Primarily pornographic. She said search engines are not simply imperfect machines, but systems designed by humans in ways that replicate the power structure of Western countries where they are built complete with all the sexism and racism that are built into those structures. Joy Boulovinis Gender Shades research in 2018 documented something striking. Facial recognition error rates. Lighter skinned male 0.8 maximum percent error rate. In darker skinned females 34 to 47% misclassification rate. That's not a small gap. That's a chasm. Why? Training data sets were overwhelmingly lighter skinned and male. The systems literally couldn't see faces that didn't look like people who built them. As William Winnie warned, we risk perpetuating inequality in the guise of machine neutrality if we are not paying attention. Ruha Benzim calls this the new Jim Code. Technology is not creating the problems, it's a reflecting and amplifying and often hiding pre existing forms of inequality. Caroline Criado Perez book Invisible Woman introduces another essential concept, the gender data gap. Throughout research, policy, technology, and design, female specific data is systematically omitted. The default is male, she argues. Women are treated as atypical deviations from the human norm. The examples are striking. Crash test dummies are designed around 50th percentile male body. Result, women are 47% more likely to be seriously injured in car crashes. Medical research excluded women from clinical trials until 1990s. Women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed after heart attacks because the symptoms differ. Office temperatures are set for male metabolic rates. Voice recognition systems perform worse for women because training data skews male. And there is Amazon. From 2014 to 2017, Amazon developed a hiring algorithm trained on a decade of resumes. The algorithm learned to penalize resumes containing women's, as in women's chess club captain, and downgraded graduates of all women's colleges. Despite attempts to fix it, Amazon scrapped the project entirely. They could not guarantee it wouldn't discriminate. That's what Noble calls laundering bias through software. India's gender gap compounds these issues. 31% of women lack smartphone internet access, according to GSMA 2023 data. Only 33% of the women use internet compared to 57% of the male population. And here's something you may not know. 36% of women faced Aadhaar authentication failures during pregnancy hospital visits. Why? Fingerprints change during pregnancy. The system wasn't designed with women's body in mind. Women comprise only 27% of women India's STEM workforce, despite being 43% of STEM graduates. That's a leaky pipeline. Women exiting at early career stage. The lesson is clear. Technology is not destiny. AI systems encode the values of those who design them. Feminist intervention in technology development is not optional, but it's essential. Transnational feminism fundamentally reoriented feminist scholarship. It challenged Western feminist universalism and developed frameworks for solidarity across difference. Chandra Talpade Mohanty's landmark essay under Westernized Feminist Scholarship and Colonial Discourses, published in 1984, changed everything. Her critique, Western feminism constructed third world women as a monolithic, homogeneous category, always already victimized, lacking agency and historical specificity. In her follow up essay under Western Eyes Revisited, Mohanty introduced the feminist solidarity model against feminist as tourist or feminist as explorer approaches. Not charity, not rescue, but solidarity. Gayatri Chandravarti Spivak. Can the Subaltern Speak? with approximately 34,000 citations, remains foundational. Her famous formulation regarding sati, white men saving brown women from brown men. This critiques both colonial rescue narratives and nationalist defenses, neither truly centers the woman herself. The subaltern cannot speak, not because they literally lack voice, but because structural disadvantages prevent their voices from being heard without distortion. When we speak for marginalized women, whose story are we really telling? Spivak's concept of strategic essentialism offer a way forward. Temporary solidarity based on shared identity for political action. Despite internal differences, useful for coalition building while remaining alert to its limitations. Maria Lugones developed the concept of coloniality of gender. Gender itself is colonial imposition, constitutive of colonial mentality and modernity. Says that the colonial imposition of gender cuts across questions of ecology, economics, government, relations with spirit world, and knowledge, as well as across everyday practices. Oironke Oivumi's invention of women argued that gender was not as organizing principle in Yoruba society prior to colonization. Colonial gender systems imposed binary, hierarchical categories where none existed. These insights matter for Indian feminism. They remind us that tradition is often colonial invention. Recovering indigenous gender arrangements require careful historical work. Dalit feminism offers crucial intervention into transnational feminist discourse. Intersectionality entered Indian feminism through Dalit feminist thought, paralleling how black feminist thought challenged mainstream American feminism. Dalit feminists have bypassed that India state to engage with UN mechanisms, connecting with anti-racist movements globally. They have built transnational coalitions while remaining rooted in local struggle. The transnational circulation of #MeToo reaching 85 plus nations with local adaptations demonstrations that possibilities and limits. India's Raya Sarkar's list, Nigeria's Arveya MeToo movement transform as they travel. Transnational feminism doesn't mean imposing one feminism everywhere. It means building solidarity across difference, recognizing that your liberation is bound up with mine. We have covered enormous ground in these 10 lectures. Let me draw together some threads. First, feminism is not one thing. It's a living tradition of thought and action, constantly debating, evolving, and sometimes contradicting itself. Liberal, radical, socialist, post colonial, queer, these approaches sometimes conflict, and that's okay. Productive disagreement is how movements grow. Second, intersectionality is not optional. From Kimberly Crenshaw initial insight to disability justice to transnational feminism, we have seen again and again that single axis analysis fails. A Dalit woman's experience cannot be understood by adding caste oppression to gender oppression. The whole is different from the sum of its parts. Third, the personal is political and structural. Individual choices matter, but they are shaped by systems. Fighting for reproductive rights means supporting individual women's decisions and challenging the healthcare, legal, and economic system that constrain those decisions. Fourth, technology is not neutral. From digital feminism to algorithmic oppression, we have seen that new tools encode all in old inequalities unless we actively intervene. Feminist intervention in technology is essential. Fifth, solidarity requires work. We cannot simply assume common sisterhood. Building genuine solidarity means acknowledging differences in power and privilege, listening to those who most marginalized, recognizing that our liberation is bound up with theirs. Now, I won't pretend we have resolved this tension, what we are explored. How do we have balance universal rights with cultural specificity? How do we address gender without reinforcing gender? How do we build coalition across deep differences? These questions remain open and they should remain open. A feminism that claims all the answer is a feminism that has stopped listening. Now, theory matters, but only if it leads to practice. As Bell Hooks wrote, feminism is for everybody. Feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. Not to understand sexism, though understanding helps. To end it, what does feminism mean for you? Maybe it means noticing whose voices are missing in the room you inhabit. Maybe it means reconsidering assumptions you have never questioned. Maybe it means joining a movement, supporting an organization, showing up for a cause. Maybe it means having difficult conversation with people you love. Feminism isn't just academic. It's about how we live, how we treat each other, how we imagine different futures. Now, over these 10 lectures, my hope has been to offer you tools, conceptual tools for understanding gender, power, and resistance, tools for asking better questions, tool for recognizing when common sense is actually ideology, tools for imagining that things could be otherwise. Use these tools, build on them, critique them, improve them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If these lectures have been valuable, share them with others who might benefit. Leave comments with your questions and disagreements. Subscribe for the future content. And most importantly, keep questioning, keep organizing, keep imagining a more just world. This has been Feminism, Theory and Practice. I am Rahul Kundu.